to get going on our webinar today. So thanks everyone for joining us. Excited to welcome everyone to our first webinar in a three-part series on electricity markets. This is a topic we have heard a great deal about from our members in just terms of learning a little bit more on the topic. We've been putting together some materials ourselves at NGA on just some educational items. We are working on a series of things that will be going on our landing page, like a market distinctions document, jurisdictional authorities documents, and glossary and other items, just in terms to kind of dive deep on a topic that can get a little technical, complex, and we have some great experts here today to kick off this webinar series. Today is focused on a 101 type aspect. The next webinar, which is next Tuesday, so we're kind of doing these fast, will be on jurisdictional authorities, so hearing from FERC and potentially a state PUC rep. And then the third one will be on current events. All that will be tossed onto the NGA landing page for folks to refer back to at a future date. So if you weren't able to make it for this, hopefully listening to this down the road on our landing page. So I will stop right there and allow our great speakers that we have lined up for today talking about this important topic. We have Mark LaBelle, associate from the Regulatory Assistance Project. He has lots of experience on just electricity market evolution and design, and has written a lot of great blogs that have been informative for me that I've been reading up on the topic. I'm really excited to hear his perspective. Saw that he has some great graphics too for the audience, so I'm excited to hear more from his presentation in just a moment. And then Evelyn Robinson, Managing Partner of State Government Affairs at PJM Interconnection. We've worked with Evelyn a bit in the past too, and really appreciate her partnership with states and trying to get connected with states in the region. PJM is a grid operator in the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest region as well. You'll get to see a little bit more of her jurisdiction and how they work with states. Yeah, really excited to kick this off, just hearing more about electricity markets. So Mark, we can kick it over to you first, and I have your slides queued up, and just say next and I'll cue them forward. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation, Matt and Jessica. Really glad to be here today. Thank you to the National Governors Association for digging in on this topic. I'm sure you've probably worked with some of my colleagues on wholesale market issues, and we'd be happy to work with you at any point in the future as well. If I think you know how to reach out to us, including our contact information here. I've been with RAP for about 2.5 years now, working on a wide range of issues. I also specialize in retail rate design and net metering reform. Next slide. So let's begin at the beginning. So the electric utility industry really started in the late 19th century. On the right there is the very first power plant in the United States in New York City at Pearl Street. And originally it was a competitive market. They charged what they thought they could charge to the customers they could reach. There was a wide range of dissatisfaction with that for a variety of different reasons. And Samuel Insull and other leaders of the industry actually pushed for state regulation of the industry to go along with state-backed monopoly service territories. Sort of the public rationales for that included natural monopoly and the idea that this was wasteful competition, that it was more expensive to have multiple providers than one single monopoly provider. There was also some aesthetic aspects of this as well. Having more than one set of wires draped everywhere across cities was not particularly pleasing. You see similar things in other countries today if you travel overseas. The federal role on electric utility issues really was mainly created in the 1930s. There was the interstate commerce gap that was filled by the Federal Power Act. There was a separate law, the Public Utilities Holding Company Act, that required the breakup of the major interstate utility conglomerates. There's a lot of drama over this over several decades. And then there was a Rural Electrification Act and a number of different initiatives to establish co-ops and other sort of a wide variety of efforts to push electric service across the entire country, which is typically not investor-owned utilities. So next slide. So with that background, in the middle of the 20th century, we had a fairly standard pattern of investor-owned utilities, electric utilities, really dominating electric markets across the country and serving the vast majority of customers and load. If you follow my little metaphor about ruling the earth, we have a little dinosaur, vertically integrated utility overseeing the city. So, there was a very particular regulatory model that came along with this time period that was adopted really in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Cost of service rate making became the predominant model. There was a standardized accounting under the FERC uniform system of accounts. There was a very set way of doing things under the model. There were, of course, wholesale sales and interstate commerce that were regulated by FERC, sales to smaller utilities, PPAs, and then other informal sales and trading between utilities. Next slide. So under the traditional vertically integrated electric utility model, there was one company that would own the central generating station, the transformers that go to the transmission system. Sometimes there'd be customers connected at the transmission level, like an oil refinery or something else, a major customer. Then you'd have step-down transformers that go to the distribution system and connect to smaller customers, smaller commercial and industrial customers. And then you'd have the power lines that we see on our streets every day that are primary voltage, and then we see that the trash can transformers that converted to secondary voltage for residential and small commercial customers. In this traditional model, the utility owned everything from the power plant all the way down to the meter that connects to the customer. So, at some point in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the dinosaurs looked up and they saw this little light in the sky, and they're like, oh, what's that? So things started to change. Really, there were important new technological developments. Nuclear power was really invented in the 40s and 50s and became widespread in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We'll come back to that. Combustion turbines were really based on jet engines and weren't established as a viable technology until the 1960s and became prevalent sort of after that. And then combined cycle generation, which is sort of based on a combustion turbine but has a second cycle, becomes viable in the 1980s and 1990s. All these different technologies changed how you think about generation as a natural monopoly. There was a major Northeast blackout that portrayed a lack of coordination in the 60s. And then we had the international oil crises that had serious effects for the electric markets, not to speak of gasoline markets and many other things as well. And then there was the general deregulatory movement, in some ways, where many different airlines, railroads, almost anything you could think of, was regulated fairly similarly to electric utilities for the middle part of the 20th century, but were deregulated in different timeframes. And the key academic work specific to electricity was really done in the 1980s. Next slide. So even in the 60s, some of the issues with the traditional utility structure and rate making and regulation were fairly well understood. The cost plus revenue structure of cost of service regulation provided little incentive for cost control. There was a major incentive to make large capital investments, but little incentive to operate reliably and efficiently. There was not a great incentive to coordinate with neighboring utilities and jurisdictions. And then introducing choice of customer supply presented some really thorny regulatory issues under that traditional model. Next slide. So as you see from this chart this is US average electricity prices over time, the oil crises in particular really shot up power prices in the 70s, and that had a wide range of short and long-term effects. One important effect is that to avoid these high fuel costs, one of the economic ideas was to invest in higher capital cost coal and nuclear plants on the theory that they would have lower fuel costs going forward. Next slide. So there were a wide range of controversies under this traditional regulatory model as well, particularly in the 70s. The new generation technologies that I mentioned sort of changed how you think about utility economies of scale and started to become no longer a natural monopoly, at least for generation. Partly in reaction to high fuel prices, oil and gas, utilities made these major capital investments in nuclear and coal plants. And then particularly with the nuclear plants, there were major cost overruns that led to disallowances and major litigation in the 80s. Integrated resource planning was another set of tools that was adopted in the 80s and 90s to try to get a better handle on planning and include demand side resources. And then in the 80s and 90s, industrial customers really put a ton of political pressure to demand the lowest rates possible, particularly as new supply, natural gas in many cases, undercut the historic embedded costs offered by existing utilities. So that's, they wanted new choices. Next slide. So with all of that lengthy background, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of talk about both at academic level and then in the political system about how to structure and shape and what you would do with a wholesale electricity generation market. Some of the key goals were efficient and coordinated regional dispatch of generation. There's some technical terms like bid-based, security constrained, economic dispatch with locational prices. There's efficient entry and exit of power plants. You want plants that are costly and old to retire, and you want efficient new ones to replace them. Customer choice, an important goal. And then there's a general idea that wholesale markets are a flexible tool to help you achieve your public policy goals. It's not a one-size-fits-all option, and markets can serve any number of public policy ends. Next slide. So this is a longish list of key federal policies that enabled all this. There's PURPA in 1978, which really allowed the first independent generators to connect to the utility systems with mandatory long-term contracts. The Energy Policy Act of 92 really enabled wholesale electricity markets and partially amended the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935, which is important for another set of reasons. In 2005, there's another set of federal legislation that amended or sort of expanded FERC authority over different aspects of electricity markets, particularly reliability. And there's also a full repeal of the Public Utility Holding Company Act, which is why you've seen so many mergers over the last 16 years. The key FERC orders are 888 and 889, and then 2000. Those really established the key principles that allowed open access to transmission, information sharing, regional planning, and then the formation, encouraging the formation of these regional transmission organizations that are the same as the independent system operators. Next slide. So each state also had to act individually to set up wholesale markets in different ways. And the way that each state did this varied quite a bit, and regions sort of coordinated around common frameworks in many respects. But the way that asset ownership was restructured varied a lot between New England and the Midwest. California has its own very special story in this regard. So you have sort of a very different wholesale markets and very different restructuring frameworks in different parts of the country. You know, there are many places where there are wholesale markets on the map that still have vertically integrated utilities in one way or another. Even within these different areas, the structure of supply procurement for retail customers can be quite different. And when they passed these laws in the different states, many of them, that was when some of the renewable portfolio standards and energy efficiency policies were first established. So that these were not separate issues even at the time. This was part of the package of overall restructuring. Next slide. So this is just a map of the ISOs and the different wholesale markets that exist in the US today. This does notably omit the Western Energy Imbalance Market, which is sort of a wholesale market light that covers much of the interior West and coordinates with the California ISO. But this is a lot of the country that's covered by wholesale markets, including two big parts of Canada. But again, it's worth emphasizing that these ISOs each work very differently, and the restructuring framework established by each state, even within, say, PJM, can be quite a bit different. Next slide. So this is just a longish list of the fun and exciting implementation issues that the ISOs have faced over the last 20 or so years. Prevention of market power manipulation is a key issue. How do you deal with stranded costs for legacy generation assets from the previous utilities? Is it fair to ask shareholders to pay for some of them? What do consumers pay for? Constructing planning and rules for reliability, market products and definitions, energy markets, reserve markets, frequency response, capacity markets, and on and on and on. Transmission planning is something that's ended up in sort of a middle ground where it's still cost of service based, but sort of is overseen by the ISOs and RTOs. And then there's been an active debate over the last 20 years about how you integrate demand side and distribution level resources. And then we could talk further about the debate over how state energy and environmental policies impact wholesale markets. I think it's important to note that As I noted earlier, many of the foundational energy efficiency and renewables policies were passed at the same time as restructuring in some states. This is not necessarily separate, and wholesale markets really can be a flexible tool to help states efficiently implement their policies and shouldn't necessarily be viewed as like an unfair outside influence on these markets. Again, it's a little more complicated than that, but we can get into it. So next slide, that's all I had planned for you all today, and hopefully I am on time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. That was excellent, and excited to dive in on some of those topics a little bit later. I tossed a note in the chat for folks to have any questions ready for the Q&A session. You can put those in the chat or the Q&A toolbox, and we can make sure to answer those. I know I have a lot of questions queued up for items that were relevant there. And yeah, it was really great to hear, because I think just being able to have that history and background is important to be able to set the stage for a lot of the stuff that's actually going on now. I know a lot of electricity and transmission planning is just a topic that comes up time and time again for states. So really happy to hear that background. But next we'll turn it over to Evelyn. Thanks so much for taking a bit of time off your vacation to talk to us today. We really appreciate that, and know you have some great things to say. So happy to have you present next. So
hey, thanks, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Matt, Jessica, NDA, for inviting me here today. Mark is a tough act to follow. The next time I want to go before Mark, but certainly I've got to comment on a couple of his slides. But as you indicated, my name is Evelyn Robinson. I'm Managing Partner at State Government Affairs with PJM. I'm also going to tell you that I have with me Tim Burtis. He is on the line, and he might be on video as Evelyn Robinson with no video. But Tim is our Manager of State Policy Solutions, which is a team that was stood up to address offshore wind, resource adequacy, grid modernization, grid reliability, and a couple of more issues. The whole purpose of that group is to accommodate state policy. So whenever I'm talking to organizations such as this, it's always helpful to have Tim with me. So he is here, and he is one of my key colleagues. Tim and I work in tandem. But let me just talk to you a little bit about PJM's markets as a glance. PJM, in case you don't know, operates and coordinates the movement of electricity in 13 jurisdictions plus the district plus DC. Our region extends from New Jersey all the way down to North Carolina, over down to Tennessee, and over to Michigan, including the great state of Ohio, the Buckeye State, which is, of course, as you all know by now, the heart of it all. Everything that PJM does, including all of its electricity market, underpins reliability. At PJM, what we like to say is reliability is job one. If the lights aren't on, then nothing else matters. So we really do a really great job, we believe, of maintaining the reliability of the grid. And the markets is just one of the ways that we do it. Next slide, please. Before I jump into it, I want to give a kudo and a thank you for Mark for the history that he set forth. He talked about the regulatory developments back in 1920s. I just want to add that PJM was actually established in 1927 as a power pool with companies in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. Even though PJM doesn't stand for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, you can see why people think that it does. But let's take a quick look at our markets. We have an energy market. Most people, when they think about PJM, they think about our capacity market, but the largest of our markets is the energy market, and that comprises about 63% of our wholesale electricity costs. The energy market is mostly that which operates exactly like a stock exchange. PJM matches the demand for electricity with the supplies to make sure that electricity needs are met on a constant basis. As the market operator, PJM ensures that the role is to balance the needs of the buyers, the role of the needs of the seller, and all of the other market participants. And we also monitor the market to ensure equitable and fair activities are taking place in the market. So now we have the energy market. The energy market is divided into two markets. That's the day-ahead market and the real-time market. And you see them both referenced here. The long-term market we'll talk about in just a few seconds. If you go to the next slide, please. So the energy market is the day-ahead market and the real-time market. So let's focus just first on the day-ahead market. The day-ahead market is a forward market, which means prices are set for energy that will be delivered in the future the very next day. Hourly prices are then calculated on the generator's offers, and the bids from the power companies and the power consumers, such as utility companies and market-related financial transaction. So the whole point of it is to make sure that you have enough power tomorrow and you're bidding for it today. So that's why we call it the day-ahead market. So it's actually self-explanatory. The real-time market is a little bit different, but it's also designed to make sure that power is there when it's needed to be. It serves electricity demand in real time, which always differs a little bit from that which is day ahead or any of the forecasts. You can just imagine that on a real-time basis, that power that you need is a little bit different from what you would have thought. Sometimes it's a little lower and sometimes it's a little higher. But the supply and demand are constantly paired and prices are calculated in PJM for every 5 minutes for more than 10,000 different pricing points, just to make sure that the pricing points are done and that you have reliable electricity on a constant basis. As I said at the beginning, all of our markets are designed to underpin the reliability of the grid. And these are just two of the basic markets that do that. Next slide, please. Let's talk about economic dispatch. I would just say that Mark mentioned it just a few minutes ago. It is a very complex kind of process, but the real concept of it is that PJM matches offers from the lowest to the highest price offers from the sellers, so that it will meet the demand that we need. So as long as you start at the bottom with the lowest offer until you reach the point that the demand will be satisfied. So you will then, that means that we dispatch resources that are least cost before we dispatch resources that are more expensive. The whole point of this too is to make sure that reliability of the grid is maintained. So this slide in essence shows an example of economic dispatch on a basic operating day. When demand is low, then the lower price generation can serve the demand. But as the demand increases, then you have to bring on more high price generation to meet those demand. So it really is kind of intuitive that the lower the demand, then the lower the price, but on a real-time basis. But as the demand increases, so then will the cost. We can talk about that later if you need to understand it a little more clearly. But I would just also say that the day-ahead market, the real-time market, and the economic dispatch are concepts that are basically taught in PJM courses over many hours. These are like a 2-day courses. So this is very much the Cliff Note version of it all. So next slide, please. Let's talk about PJM's capacity market. Now, PJM's capacity market is called Reliability Pricing Market Model. You might have heard it as RPM. This market ensures long-term grid reliability instead of day ahead or real time. It makes sure that we have enough power 3 years forward so that reliability of the market will be ensured. So we forecast 3 years in advance as to what will be needed, and then we run an auction. Now this map shows the clearing prices in PJM's most recent capacity auction. Now it's no secret that PJM has had some challenges with our capacity auction over the last couple of years. It was sidelined for several years with trying to meet the compliant requirements of FERC order regarding the minimum offer pricing rule. We have gotten that together, and we were very happy to run our auction in May of 2021. We have our next auction scheduled for December of 2021, and we are doing them pretty regularly until we can get back on schedule. But you can see that the price in the RTO, which is the general price of the PJM region, is $50, which is fairly low for a capacity market. The highest is the BG&E zone, which separated at $126.50. But the whole point of the capacity market, as I said, is to make sure 3 years from now, there will be enough capacity in the ground or demand resources to make sure that our electricity needs are met in the most reasonable cost component aspect yet, or as traditionally it has been called the least cost option. With the advent of more renewables, you'll hear words more likened to the most reasonable cost offer. Next slide, please. Let's talk real quickly about ancillary services. These are needed to support grid reliability, just like the rest of them are. Now, as we talk about regulation and reserve markets, they will sound a little bit alike. The real distinction between it is that under regulation, you have an automated signal. So under regulation, there are some fluctuations, some instability in the system on basically a constant basis, but the regulation service will make sure that the system remains stable at any point in time. Reserves are kind of like what it says. So if there's a power supply that is needed on a very short notice, something happens with the system, a generator goes down or a power line goes down, what we do with our reserves is we bring them online very quickly to make sure that order is restored and power is restored and the system remains reliable at all times. So those are the functionalities of regulation and reserve market, similar but a little bit different. And remember that the key words with regulation is going to be an automated signal. Next slide, please. So Mark and Matt both referenced the PJM states and the diversity of the PJM states. But this is an interesting slide in that 10 of the 14 jurisdictions in PJM have some sort of renewable portfolio standard or a target. And just for the sake of using the right words, we'll just call them state targets here. But a couple of the interesting ones here are Maryland, 50% of their usage by 2030 should be from a renewable source. Now, just in case you're thinking that's a long way away, from my calculation, that is only 9 short years from now. And that is an aggressive, but from Maryland's public policy perspective, a doable goal. You will see that DC says that they want to be 100% renewable by 2032, 11 short years from now. So I think you can see that the many states in PJM, just like much of the world, is moving to a more renewable focus on their electricity resources, right? You have companies, large companies, Microsoft, Google, Walmart, who also have their own goals, and they certainly are in all of these states and trying to drive towards a more renewable standard. And I think it's clear that PJM, with standing up our state policy solution, which is Tim's group, and our new strategy understands that we have a very diverse footprint and that there's a large portion of that footprint that is moving and marching towards renewable goals at a steady pace. And we know that we have to keep up with it. Next slides, please. So one of the interesting ways that we have developed, we believe, to help the states with their renewable goals, with their own policy goals, whatever those goals might be, is what we call the state agreement approach. And this basically allows a state or a group of states to include their public policy requirements in our planning parameters. That way we would develop resources the way that they want. For example, New Jersey wants offshore wind. So we have entered into agreement with New Jersey to initiate the state agreement approach that will address up to 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. The key component of the state agreement approach is cost allocation. Now, with cost allocation, as you can imagine, when you have a diverse footprint such as PJM, even though all of our states love New Jersey and they respect them widely, most of those states are saying whatever New Jersey wants to do, that is absolutely fine, but we do not want to bear the cost of what New Jersey wants to do. And vice versa. So New Jersey is not necessarily wanting to pick up the cost associated with Pennsylvania or Ohio's public policy. So under the state agreement approach, whatever the state does, if they want to move forward with the state agreement approach, the cost of that project, that cost of that state policy will be borne solely by the consumers in that state. In this case, it would be borne by the residents of New Jersey. But we really believe that that is a really good approach and one that we're very proud and happy of and very happy to see it come to fruition. Next slide, please. So we also have some offshore wind targets in a number of our footprints. You can see we just talked about the ones in New Jersey, 7,500 megawatts by 2035. Maryland has 5,200 by 2034, and Virginia does, and Maryland has 1,568 by 2030. So these are some really interesting targets. So one of the things that PJM has been working on lately is what we call a offshore wind working group with our states. And the states have been driving that. And we have been working with our states to determine a number of scenarios that would help these states to effectuate their public policy goals. And we believe that if you were to become a little more active in our stakeholder process, you would hear lots of information about how the offshore wind targets are being implemented and how we are moving forward with it. I would also give at this point in time a plug for what we call the Independent State Agreements Committee, which is a conglomeration or a coalition of all of the states in PJM footprint, but it includes more than just the state commission. It includes state energy offices. The governor's offices are welcome to attend as well. And you'll hear more about how these offshore wind targets in the PJM states are moving along. And you can see at the bottom of that graphic exactly the timeline for how those state policy goals regarding offshore wind expect to be implemented. Next slide, please. So I think this is my last slide, but I think the reason that we have this slide is that PJM's queue is determining how the generation will be coming online in the years and in the months and the days ahead. So when you look at our queue, most of that queue will show an influx of interconnection in a couple of years. And the resources that are seeking to interconnect are generally renewable based, solar, wind, hydro, or hybrid aspect of that, battery storage, those kinds of things is what's looking to come into our system. And I would also say that to move it through, we have undertaken some sort of transmission planning reform. And for those of you who might be familiar, obviously FERC is in the midst of this as well with the ANOVA that it just released, which also addresses a lot of transmission planning reform. But under our planning reform, we are talking with our stakeholders and engaging in broader stakeholders regarding the public policy that needs to be addressed so that we can make sure that these state goals and these renewable resources can come online without causing any problems with the reliability of the grid. I guess as a final word, I would say, and I know that I'm running pretty close to time here, my last comment is that I believe it was Mark's last slide where he had a list of questions, a list of challenges that have been addressed: stranded costs, transmission planning. What do you do about demand side resources in the midst of all of this? Well, those are traditional issues, and I'm here to say that they are hot and prevalent right now. Those are some of the hot topics that we're dealing with on a daily basis at PJM. FERC Order 2222 dealing with the integration of distributed energy resources is taking up a lot of our time as we work with the states to try to figure out how to maneuver through Order 2222. And I believe that we have a great and interesting and exciting next few years regarding all of these topics, and I'm excited to be a part of it. And with that, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to help answer any questions if you have any for me. And thank you for your time, but I'm open to questions. Back to you, Matt.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, that was awesome material. I got a question about these slides will be available, and yes, for folks to dig in on further later. So yeah, if anyone has questions at the moment, feel free to ask us in the chat or Q&A. I have a number of them. And I think like Evelyn just mentioned, I'm sort of interested in checking out some of the implementation issues a little bit more and just like seeing it, or hearing about some of the conversations you both are working on. not sure if you wanted to pick a biggest issue out of the bunch or one of those that you find yourself working on most. I can also refer back to that slide too, if that would be helpful for both of you.
Hey, Matt, this is Evelyn. I will jump in. And Tim Burtis, if you can open your mic, that would be great. Well, one of the biggest issues that we are working on is Order 2222. The order is dealing with the integration of demand energy resources into the wholesale market. It certainly raises some issues regarding the appropriate jurisdiction level. Where is the federal jurisdiction as opposed to the state level jurisdiction? And how will it actually be integrated? You know, what role will the distribution company have? Should it be a DSO model? It really raises a number of major issues. PJM will very soon release a draft of what it expects to file at FERC on Order 2222, and that will be public probably in the next week or two. But Tim and I spend quite a bit of time, and with our states. I think that is probably, from my perspective, one of the best aspects of Order 2222. It provides a perfect opportunity and requires engagement with the states to figure out some of these issues, just to make sure the state policy and the state perspectives are considered as we move forward with the orders. Tim Burtis, anything you would wish to add there, please?
Yeah, no, thanks, Evelyn, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I think as Evelyn had said, 2222 is probably the most state-centric, industry-changing potential order here out of the FERC that's going to adjust how we do things at the wholesale transmission level, which are under the traditionally under the regulation of the federal government, but it really redefines the nexus between what is federal jurisdiction and what is state jurisdiction, and is going to, in no small part, really redefine the industry and how what has traditionally been state regulation, distribution type resources can interact in interstate markets. They can get compensated in interstate markets, and how that can lead to the proliferation of these types of resources at the local level. And with that, there's pluses and there's minuses, and there's things that obviously are going to require a lot of coordination to help work through those. So very much on the radar, and we're looking implementation wise, we will see, but just so everybody knows, this isn't coming tomorrow, but we are, you know, it could be 3-4 years or so of implementation.
Great. Yeah, and that's a good flag, because we are hosting FERC next Tuesday on a webinar, and perhaps we can get into a little bit of that nexus of federal and state jurisdiction. Not sure how specific we can get, but interested to see if that's within talking ability. So Mark, if you had one of these topics that you spend a lot of your time on or wanted to talk more about, I'd be happy to hear what your thoughts are on these issues.
Well, one fun topic is sort of I'm a lawyer, so the intersecting jurisdiction between transmission planning and siting is a tremendously fraught thing that's going to be played out over the next coming decades, and has been a recurring issue. As Evelyn noted, this is an evergreen list in many ways. So, you know, there are cost recovery and different items that are handled at the ISO level, but siting is still state jurisdictional. So how do we try to get all of these things to play together a little better, or at least have a predictability and an understanding that, you know, maybe you can't totally solve the land use conflicts in a vacuum, but it's an important thing to keep an eye on, because there's an enormous need and enormous value in getting better transmission interconnections across certain parts of the country. The Canadian New England border has been an area of continued dispute about where we can and should put transmission lines and for what reasons. So I think that there's a tremendously important set of issues there as well. Very excited about the demand side stuff and FERC 2222. But
cool. Yeah, that's super helpful. The siting issue is definitely one that we've heard too on our side. And just if I think some states are having to think creatively to align some of their clean energy goals to fit some of these plannings, because siting doesn't take just any short time frame, it can be many years. So yeah, that is definitely something. If you're setting a target to get 100% clean energy by 2032, that hopefully the siting all works out for DC, I guess. So anyway, I think next question I had that popped up during Evelyn's presentation is just like the distinctions between let's see, energy markets or real-time markets and capacity markets. And perhaps if you could just walk me through a little bit more and like why it's necessary to have all three, the day ahead, real-time, capacity markets. It sounded like there's similar elements to all of them and kind of how they complement each other and save costs in the long run. Because yeah, I'd be curious to hear this differences there again a little bit.
Yeah, let me take a stab at it. So the energy market for PJM is what is needed. When you flip the lights, you want the electricity to be there. So that's more like the energy market, right? That's literally the electricity on a going forward basis every day. The capacity market is to make sure that there's enough incentive for resources to commit. What the capacity market does is send the price signal that says, hey, as we look into our forecast 15 years down, it looks like we're going to need, let's say, I'm making these numbers. We're going to need 1,000 megawatts of of generation in 2024. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that by 2024, that 1,000 megawatts of electricity is there. Under our system, which is reliability, price, and market model, if we didn't do that, we would not know what would be there, whether there would be enough iron in the ground, enough demand response, enough resources to meet that model. So basically, the way we have described it, generally speaking, is capacity resources is iron in the ground in the future to meet our needs. Whereas the energy market says, oh, I have enough supply right now, so that when the 65 million people in the PJM region turns their light on, it's here. But the capacity market assures that when you turn the lights on 3 years in the future, that the power will click together. The difference between the regulation reserve and the regulation and the day ahead and the real-time market, it's pretty, it's literally a one-day difference, right? So like if today it gets hotter than you can possibly anticipate in Ohio, if it's over 100 and the demand goes way high up with the electricity, then you might need some more energy to come in. We might have to have some of the utilities buy a little more power, and a little more power is needed in that area to meet the demand in Ohio, for example. So that's why you have the day ahead and the real-time markets, just to meet those fluctuations. Tim, can you provide any more clarity?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll offer is, I think about it if I have an air conditioner, right? So we have 4 primary markets: energy, capacity, and then 2 under our ancillary services market, regulation and synchronized reserves. Energy is about, call it roughly 75% of costs. Capacity is roughly 20, and then ancillary services are your balance. And if I have an air conditioner, I want to go turn on that air conditioner right now, I'm using PJM's energy market, right? Instantaneously, that market is providing the power I need to put that air conditioner on. If I'm using the capacity market, it's because I want to use that air conditioner 3 years from now, and I need to make sure that it'll be able to run on the hottest day or the hottest hour of the year. If I want to turn on and off my air conditioner, and my neighbor wants to do that, and his neighbor wants to do that, I'm going to be using PJM's regulation market. We're going to be able to smooth out all of those little variations of use of the system that, when you add it up, over 65 million people actually mean real megawatts. And then finally, the synchronized reserve market. If PJM were to lose the largest generator on our system, a 2,000 megawatt nuclear plant, my air conditioner would be able to still run, because we'd be able to pick up and instantaneously provide and replace that missing 2,000 megawatts of generation without any impact to my air conditioner being able to run. So that's how the markets work and how we actually use them on a day-to-day basis, even though we may not think about it.
Hey, Tim, I just would add that under the regulation market, there's an automated signal. So that's how quickly it comes on. It's an automated signal, and the regulation services are activated or implemented immediately.
So I'm prepared to offer a little bit of a different perspective on this one. So there's an interesting debate over capacity markets, I think, because there are many wholesale markets across the world, and Texas and Alberta that don't have capacity markets. And there is a long historical debate about the practice and theory of a capacity market and how they might evolve to continue to provide reliability in a cost-effective way. I think I don't want to straw man it, but sort of to give you the downside of a capacity market, just for everyone who's listening. The capacity market is a very focused payment for generators showing up on a few very peak days of the year, and it doesn't necessarily ensure that those generators are going to show up during what is traditionally thought of as off-peak seasons. In New England, we've had a continued debate over winter reliability, and there's generally agreed that the capacity market is not particularly targeted to solve those issues. So there's been winter reliability programs and a whole set of other programs to ensure that we can have reliable electricity on the coldest days in the winter in New England. So there's been a variety of debates about performance-based and other year-round sort of variations on the capacity market, so to ensure that if there's a reliability event, those resources are also going to respond at that time. What's the right payment level? So on the one hand, that sort of shows that there's a set of graduations between what is the energy market and what is sort of the original simplest version of a capacity market. But there is a real debate about whether you should plan for reliability within energy markets, within reserve requirements, within a whole range of other policies. And there's plenty of people who think that a capacity market is inefficient or overly expensive or whatever else. I'm not here to. I have colleagues that have stronger feelings about this than I do, and would use even more colorful language. But there are we could talk about Texas and their issues this past winter and what caused those. But I think there are jurisdictions across the world that have kept the lights on reliably without a capacity market, and there's a variety of different approaches that you can take. So,
hey, Mark, this is Evelyn, and Tim and I certainly recognize that there's a huge debate undergoing right now about the viability of a capacity market construct. And absolutely, you're right. We're just believing that the capacity market is one of the mechanisms that can be used to ensure reliability. But I will indicate that at PJM, we have capacity performance, which basically incents all of our resources to show up when they're supposed to show up. And we implemented it in 2014 after the polar vortex. And I am happy to report that since 2014, our generators have shown up at a very good rate, and we've not had any performance mechanism. But what I want to say that, in 2021, when we had the cold snap with ERCOT, the weather was fairly mild at PJM. We didn't have extremes as ERCOT did. And the one difference between ERCOT, for example, and PJM and MISO is that we are part of the Eastern Interconnection, which Texas is not. So there are a number of issues that would distinguish Texas from other portions of the country in the midst of this. But certainly the capacity market is not the only thing that would assure reliability. It's just the tool that we are currently using to help us to ensure reliability for the 65 million people we serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, thanks both for touching on the bit on cost-effective reliability, because I imagine those 2 points, cost effectiveness and reliability, can be a bit, I don't know, obviously you'd probably want to have reliability as the focus for them, but that can then drive, like, what if you're grid operation uses a capacity market, or just how they structured energy real day ahead and all those items. And yeah, I guess I had gotten a little stuck on the idea of just day ahead and real time, just that what's like the cost difference for operating both? Is that necessary? Were there decisions to include one or not the other? And I don't know, I guess that was something that was of interest for me.
Well, there's even more variations to that. If you look at the academics that really dug into this a couple of decades ago for proposed sort of multi-day rolling markets, where you do more than just day ahead in real time, you sort of do it, you do like a whole, but they love auctions. The more auctions you can do, the better, and they love to play out the mathematical assumptions. So I think there's been an interesting debate about what the right level to land on that is, and whether or not some of those alternatives are not replace, serve some of the same purposes as capacity markets, whether you can do other things with bidding that give, longer term assurance and provide better responsiveness and understanding of real-time conditions. So, there's a big toolbox out there. I think I definitely agree with that, with Evelyn on that, so.
Yeah.
But we've got a really good toolbox.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess just we had thought about, so how does the structure of these electricity markets impact consumer electric prices? I think we saw that there's been different points throughout history that electricity prices have risen pretty steadily. Post-PURPA looked like it leveled out, but generally still in the 12-cent range for a lot of areas. I'm sure folks in Connecticut or Hawaii would scream at me, say that's not right, but generally it's cheap. But yeah, how do different electricity markets kind of impact prices like that?
Well,
Mark.
I mean, just at the very highest level, I think one of the nice things where the evidence of the effectiveness of wholesale markets shown up is things like improved reliability and incentives for nuclear plants to actually manage themselves in a better way. That if you look at in the 70s and 80s, in a lot of places, nuclear plants were always breaking down. And if you sort of think about the underlying incentives there, unless the commission decided that those investments were imprudent, those utilities were going to make that money either way, whether that plant was running or not. But if that plant is an independent generator in a wholesale market, they need to be up and running to make their money. So there you see things like uprates at nuclear plants to really make sure that they're operating at full speed. And there's similar factors with other generators. I mean, there is a live debate that it's a really hard econometric thing to figure out the differences in different parts of the country that wholesale markets have made, because there's so many factors that go into it. And the wholesale markets tended to be implemented in areas that were more expensive already: New England, New York, California. So there's so many things going on that there's sort of a live debate over how much the consumers have benefited from moving to which wholesale markets frameworks.
Hey, Matt, let me just key in here just real quickly. From PJM's perspective, wholesale electricity costs have remained fairly low over the last few years. I've just showed you what the clearing prices were. But when you're talking about the cost that actually a consumer pays, especially in the PJM region, a larger portion of it is distribution costs, non-wholesale costs. In other words, when you look at the state rates, you have a lot of grid mod and other kinds of adders to the rates that actually cause the cost to increase. So the wholesale rates, at least in PJM, have remained fairly low and constant over the last few years. As one of the consumer advocates says, in fact, the consumer advocate in Ohio says, low cost for consumers is not a problem. So I showed you the map of the graph of the RTO clearing price. The Ohio consumer advocate was fairly happy with it. As he says, low cost is not a problem for consumers.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to toss it to one last question, and thanks both for diving in on this topic. It can be really technical, really complex, and kind of off that, I just wanted to ask if there's a question or misconceptions that you hear about regularly, or that you would want to raise for just folks to continue thinking about in the future, like basically what questions or misconceptions do you see most often in some of this work that you are doing?
Well, I mean, I think the debate over sort of how state energy and environmental policies impact this is an interesting one. My perspective is that you have to look at wholesale markets as a tool for implementing our really overarching public policies, and that's consumer benefits, and it absolutely includes environment and public health, right? So, you know, I'm a lawyer, so there's interesting the Supreme Court cases, Hughes, some other ones from a few years ago. You know, Maryland and some other places, they really try, well, with PJM, I think might have some particularly strong feelings about this one. They tried to directly sort of insert themselves into the mechanisms of the capacity markets in ways that were sort of squarely on point. And the Supreme Court sort of agreed that that was preempted, and for states couldn't interfere with the mechanisms of FERC and the federal and PJM in that direct a manner. Look, outside of that, I think almost every single market in the country is impacted by state policies, and to say that you know, to draw such bright lines, other than those square cases where you're directly interfering with the market, that it seems to me to be well within the rights of these states to implement their energy and environmental policies. So.
Hey, Matt, that's a really good question. Like Mark, I'm a lawyer, and Tim is in law school, so you've got a whole lot of lawyering on the panel today. But I would have to agree that one of the major constructs that we're wrestling with these days is state energy and environmental policies and how it will impact the wholesale market. You know, but at the same time, I don't know how you divorce that from the integration of demand side and distribution level resources from the wholesale market as a huge issue as well. I believe the integration of all of the issues, especially most of those issues that are listed on Mark's page here, the key implementation issues are just raging now. I think the one that is not raging most for us is stranded costs for legacy generation assets, not so much right now, but it certainly is not gone. I think planning and the rules for reliability, new projects you might need and products you might need for reliability as there is a greater proliferation of renewables. I think all of these will find a place in the new current debate as we move forward in terms of wholesale energy market. Even for those areas that don't have wholesale energy markets, these same questions are major questions that we're all dealing with. Great list of key implementation issues, Mark, and I really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, both of you. Yeah, would love to continue working with you both in the future. I know Evelyn tries to work closely with a lot of our state members, so we're hoping to keep close ties. So this is a great intro to this series. This webinar is recorded, and we'll toss it on our website and share with our members soon. But I just wanted to say thanks again, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Evelyn. It's been fun.
Thanks, Mark. My pleasure. Have a great one.
Oh, bye.